Victor Kingsley leaned back in his chair, the weight of his success evident in his smug expression. He was in his early 50s, with years of experience in business and finance that had shaped him into the confident, even arrogant millionaire he was today. Today was no different. He was about to seal a deal worth millions, a deal he had been working on for months. The boardroom was filled with high-powered individuals, all eager to witness the culmination of his efforts. The mood was one of assured success, with everyone quietly anticipating Victor's victory. But just as the meeting began, the door unexpectedly swung open. A young boy, no older than 18, stepped into the room, causing a wave of surprise among the board members. His name was Daniel, and he had been invited by one of Victor's long-time friends to provide insight into the complex financial calculations that would ultimately determine the fate of the deal. Daniel, with his unassuming presence, didn't fit the usual profile of someone who would be present in such a high-stakes meeting. He wasn't wearing a suit, nor did he carry the air of an experienced businessman. He seemed out of place, almost like a boy playing in a world of giants. Victor raised an eyebrow as Daniel made his way to the table. He took one look at the young man and instantly dismissed him. Who was this kid to offer any kind of meaningful input in a deal of this magnitude? As Victor looked over Daniel's casual attire, a slight smirk formed on his lips. He could already tell that the boy had no real understanding of the complexities that ran through the numbers. "What's the kid doing here?" Victor thought to himself. "This is no place for a street-smart amateur." He wasn't shy about showing his skepticism. Daniel, however, wasn't fazed. He had been through much tougher situations before. Growing up in the streets had taught him how to navigate all kinds of environments, including the world of finance. He had been able to learn from watching others and using his sharp instincts. As the meeting continued, Daniel listened intently to the discussions, picking up on the smallest details. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. When the conversation turned to the financial calculations that could make or break the deal, Daniel's focus intensified. Victor, feeling the weight of the room's attention, continued to dominate the conversation. He was meticulous in his presentation, confident that everything was in place. The deal was practically a done deal. But then, just as he was about to finalize the numbers, Daniel leaned forward and calmly spoke up. His voice was soft, but carried an undeniable authority. "You missed the calculation," he said. The room fell silent and all eyes turned toward him. Victor's confidence faltered for a moment. What could this boy possibly know about the intricacies of this deal? At first, Victor chuckled dismissively, thinking it was some naive comment from a young kid who had no place in the room. He looked around, expecting everyone to laugh along with him, but the silence was deafening. The others in the room were now watching Daniel with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Victor, still unsure, waved off the interruption. But Daniel didn't back down. He began to explain what he saw, how a small error in the financial calculation could cause a massive loss if left unchecked. His voice was steady, and there was an undeniable confidence in his analysis. Victor's face twisted in disbelief. He was not used to being questioned, let alone by someone so young and inexperienced. This wasn't just about the deal, it was about his pride, his authority. He was a millionaire, a man who had built his empire on his own wit and skill, and now this boy, who appeared to have no experience, was suggesting that he had made a critical mistake. Victor couldn't allow that. He mocked Daniel, questioning his qualifications and implying that a mere teenager couldn't possibly understand the complexities of the numbers. But Daniel, without hesitation, pointed out the specific flaw in Victor's calculations. As he spoke, it became clear that Daniel's understanding was far beyond his years. As the room absorbed Daniel's analysis, Victor's confidence began to crack. He hadn't expected a challenge, especially not from someone like Daniel. For a moment, Victor's mind raced, torn between disbelief and the creeping realization that maybe, just maybe, Daniel was right. He had to admit deep down that there was something about the boy's insight that made him pause. This wasn't just a young kid making a lucky guess. Daniel was speaking with an intelligence and clarity that left no room for doubt. Still, Victor's pride kept him from accepting the truth. He couldn't be wrong, not in front of his colleagues. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Victor's eyes narrowed and he leaned back in his chair, trying to conceal the frustration brewing inside him. He had spent years building his reputation, rising from nothing to become a successful businessman. And now this young boy, barely out of high school, was challenging him in front of his colleagues. Victor wasn't one to be easily rattled, but something about Daniel's calm demeanor unsettled him. He couldn't allow this to stand. "You've got a good imagination, kid," Victor said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But I've been in this game long enough to know better. I don't make mistakes like that." The tension in the room thickened, and all eyes were on Daniel. There was no doubt that the young boy had caught everyone's attention, but Victor's dismissive tone hung in the air, challenging Daniel to back up his words. "If you're so sure of yourself," Victor continued, "then prove it. I'll give you a few minutes. Show me where I went wrong, and maybe I'll reconsider my position. But remember, this isn't some high school math test. This is business." His challenge echoed through the room, and the silent pressure mounted on Daniel's shoulders. Daniel didn't flinch. He looked around at the assembled executives, then back at Victor. Despite the pressure, his expression remained unchanged, calm and unshaken. He had no formal business education, no degree from an Ivy League school. His knowledge came from a different place, one born of necessity. Growing up in the streets, Daniel had learned to navigate numbers in ways that far surpassed traditional schooling. But in this room, he was a fish out of water, and he knew that. Still, he wasn't going to back down. Victor smirked as he placed the complex set of calculations on the table in front of Daniel. It was an intricate mix of percentages, projections, and variables. Nothing Daniel seemed capable of understanding, at least in Victor's eyes. "Here it is," Victor said, his voice almost playful. "Take your time, kid. You've got a few minutes, but I'd advise you not to waste my time." The others in the room exchanged nervous glances, wondering if Daniel could really pull this off. They had seen young prodigies before, but this felt different. There was an air of disbelief, yet intrigue, as they watched the young boy prepare to tackle the task. The clock ticked down, and Daniel took a breath. He wasn't intimidated by the challenge or the judgment of the room. Instead, he focused on the numbers in front of him. As his pencil moved across the paper, there was a quiet precision in his movements. Each calculation, each adjustment, was made with the kind of accuracy that came from years of honing a particular skill set. It wasn't about formal education. It was about instinct, and Daniel had developed an incredible one for numbers. Still, the weight of the moment wasn't lost on him. Every second felt like an eternity, but he kept his eyes fixed on the task at hand. Victor watched as Daniel worked, his initial confidence now starting to waver. He had expected the young boy to falter, to struggle with the complexity of the numbers. But instead, Daniel's concentration deepened. It was clear he wasn't just running through the motions, he was dissecting every element of the calculation with a surgeon's precision. Daniel glanced up for a moment, meeting Victor's eyes. There was no arrogance in his gaze, just an unspoken understanding that the mistake was there, and it was waiting to be uncovered. It was almost as if the answer was hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to find it. The room fell silent as the final moments ticked away. The pressure in the air was palpable, and even the most seasoned executives couldn't help but watch with bated breath. Victor's smirk had faded, replaced with a thin line of frustration. He had believed in his own expertise, and yet here was this young boy, casually dismantling everything he thought he knew. The truth of the matter was that Victor had been so sure of his own calculations, so certain that his experience would carry him through, that he never considered the possibility of being wrong. And now he had to face the reality that this teenager might actually have been right. Finally, Daniel finished the calculation. He pushed the paper forward and leaned back in his chair, waiting for Victor's response. The room was still, as if everyone was holding their breath. Victor hesitated before picking up the paper, scanning Daniel's work. His eyes moved quickly, but the more he read, the more his expression shifted from disbelief to confusion. The numbers on the paper didn't lie, and in that moment, Victor realized something he had never expected. Daniel had found the error. The calculations were wrong, and it was a mistake that could cost him dearly. Victor's confidence had crumbled, and for the first time in years, he was unsure of himself. The room seemed to shrink as the clock on the wall ticked down, each second heavier than the last. Daniel's pencil moved across the paper with an almost eerie precision, a steady rhythm that contrasted sharply with the tension in the air. The board members, who had initially been dismissive of the young boy, now watched with growing curiosity. Victor, arms folded across his chest, leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing in skepticism. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why was Daniel so sure of himself? Why was he so calm? The stakes were high, and yet Daniel appeared entirely unbothered by the pressure. Victor couldn't help but feel his confidence slipping. For the first time in a long time, he began to second-guess himself. He had always prided himself on his sharp mind, the ability to look at a set of numbers and immediately know their significance. Yet here was this young kid, offering a challenge to everything he thought he knew. Every passing moment felt like a test, not just of Daniel's abilities, but of Victor's own ego. Was this really happening? Was he really about to be outsmarted by someone so much younger, so much less experienced in the world of business? As Daniel continued to work, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. The sound of his pencil scratching against the paper filled the silence, a rhythmic backdrop to the growing anxiety. There was something methodical about the way Daniel approached the task. His hand moved with steady assurance, breaking down each part of the calculation as though it were the simplest thing in the world. It was as if he could already see the mistakes in Victor's numbers, as though they were obvious to him in a way that none of the others could perceive. His calm demeanor was the exact opposite of the increasing unease around him. Victor tried to maintain his composure, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for someone to affirm that Daniel was simply wasting time. But no one spoke up. The other board members, usually quick to voice their opinions, were silent now, their focus entirely on the young boy at the table. Victor felt a flicker of doubt. Was Daniel really onto something, or was this just some clever act designed to embarrass him in front of his colleagues? But deep down, Victor knew that this was different. The young boy had caught his attention, and the more he watched, the more he realized that Daniel wasn't just a fluke. He might actually be onto something. As Daniel wrote out his formula, explaining his steps with an ease that belied his youth, Victor's doubt grew deeper. The calmness in Daniel's voice was unsettling. He wasn't rushing, wasn't scrambling to find the answer. He was explaining his thought process clearly, step by step, as if he had solved this problem 1,000 times before. Every time Daniel paused to explain a part of the equation, the room seemed to lean in closer. It was almost as if they were witnessing a master at work, an expert who could take a seemingly chaotic set of numbers and bring order to them in a way no one else could see. The more Daniel spoke, the more the tension in the room mounted. Victor, who had been the one to guide this deal for months, felt his grip on the situation slipping away. How could he have missed something so critical? How could he have trusted his own calculations so blindly? Daniel, with his quiet confidence and precision, was beginning to unravel everything Victor had built. It wasn't just about the numbers anymore. It was about trust, competence, and who truly understood what was at stake. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. If Daniel was right, the deal could collapse, and everything Victor had worked for could come crashing down. Victor glanced around the room, desperately trying to read the expressions of his colleagues. Were they starting to believe Daniel? Were they seeing what he was seeing? The doubt in his mind was growing with each passing second, each number that Daniel carefully explained. For the first time, Victor wasn't sure of himself. His usual confidence felt hollow, replaced by a sense of unease that gnawed at him. He had built a career on being right, on being the smartest person in the room, but now he wasn't so sure. Daniel, with his youthful calm and methodical approach, seemed to be dismantling everything he had taken for granted. As the final moments of the challenge ticked away, Daniel's calmness only seemed to deepen. There was no rush in his actions, no sense of panic. He didn't glance at the clock or look to see how much time was left. He simply continued to explain, his voice steady, his eyes focused on the numbers. It was as if he was in complete control, as if the outcome was already decided in his mind. Meanwhile, Victor's frustration was starting to bubble over, the unease in his chest growing heavier. How could he have been so wrong? The clock was ticking, and with every second, the truth of Daniel's calculation became more apparent. Would he admit that the boy was right, or would he continue to doubt even when the evidence was staring him in the face? The final seconds passed, and Daniel put down his pencil. The room was deathly quiet. Victor looked at the paper in front of him, then back at Daniel, his mind racing. How could he have missed something so crucial? The tension was unbearable. Victor had built his empire on calculations, on the ability to see the finer details before anyone else could. And now, this young boy had not only seen something he hadn't, but had done so with a calmness and precision that seemed almost otherworldly. The clock had run out, and Daniel had not only completed the task, he had exposed a flaw Victor had been blind to. The challenge was over, but for Victor the real challenge was just beginning. Daniel took a deep breath and with a final flourish pushed the completed calculation toward Victor. The room fell into a hushed silence as everyone leaned in to see what would happen next. His calm demeanor had not wavered throughout the process, and now, as he began explaining the solution, his voice carried an unshakable confidence. He pointed to the first error in Victor's calculations, a seemingly minor oversight that had snowballed into a massive discrepancy. As Daniel explained each step, the complexity of the mistake became clear. Victor's approach, though seemingly sound at first, was built on a flawed foundation. The board members, who had once doubted Daniel's abilities, exchanged astonished glances. One by one, they followed Daniel's logic, his ability to break down the numbers with such clarity that it was impossible to ignore. Each detail of the calculation was laid bare, and as Daniel walked them through his reasoning, it became increasingly evident that Victor's error could have resulted in a catastrophic loss for the deal. Daniel wasn't just fixing the numbers, he was revealing a weakness in Victor's strategy, something no one had anticipated. The tension in the room grew thicker with every word Daniel spoke. Victor's face flushed as he absorbed the truth of what was happening. His confidence had been shattered, but his pride was still intact, or so he hoped. The room had been silent for too long, and now Victor's voice broke the stillness. His tone was laced with disbelief, and a hint of defensiveness crept into his words. "I'm not buying this," he said, his voice cutting through the air. "You're telling me that this simple mistake could have cost millions? Are you sure about this?" Victor's challenge was not just to Daniel, but to the entire room. He was trying to buy time, attempting to regain control of a situation that had slipped through his fingers. Daniel remained unfazed by the challenge. He had expected it. After all, it wasn't easy for someone like Victor to admit that he had made a critical error, especially in front of so many witnesses. But Daniel knew that the numbers didn't lie. He had already proven his point, but Victor's resistance was just another obstacle to overcome. Without missing a beat, Daniel turned to the other experts in the room. "If you doubt my calculation, feel free to double-check," he said, his voice steady. The math speaks for itself. His invitation was simple, but it left no room for misinterpretation. Daniel had already done the hard work, and now it was up to others to see what he had uncovered. The experts in the room hesitated at first, unsure of how to react. Some exchanged uneasy glances, while others seemed to silently agree with Daniel's approach. Slowly, one of the senior analysts rose from his seat and began to scrutinize the numbers Daniel had laid out. The analyst's eyes moved quickly across the paper, and after several minutes, he looked up with a sharp breath. "He's right," the analyst said, almost in disbelief. "There's a critical flaw in Victor's original calculation. If left unchecked, the financial loss could have been enormous." The room was now filled with murmurs of astonishment. The magnitude of the error was becoming clear to everyone. Victor, still reeling from the blow, turned to the other experts in the room for confirmation, but they were all agreeing with Daniel's findings. His face darkened, and for the first time, the carefully crafted mask of arrogance slipped. "No," Victor muttered, almost to himself. "This can't be happening." His mind raced, replaying the steps of the calculation, desperately trying to find a way out. But no matter how hard he tried, the numbers didn't add up. Daniel had caught him, and there was no escaping it. The sting of defeat was bitter, and Victor's pride, once unshakable, had been bruised in front of everyone. As the realization set in, Daniel's calmness was in stark contrast to the storm brewing in Victor's mind. Daniel had done what others couldn't. He had seen something hidden in the numbers, something that no one else had picked up on. It wasn't just about the calculation. It was about how Daniel's mind worked. He had trained himself to see beyond the surface, to read the smallest details, and most importantly, to trust his instincts. While Victor relied on his experience and authority, Daniel relied on his sharp intuition, honed from a lifetime of overcoming challenges. And it was this unique perspective that had led him to uncover the flaw. Victor's mind was still spinning as he struggled to accept what had just happened. The loss he had narrowly avoided seemed almost unreal, and he could hardly believe that a young boy, someone with no formal business training, had been the one to expose it. It was as if Daniel had read the deal like an open book, understanding it on a level that Victor himself had missed. How had Daniel come to this conclusion so quickly? What was it about the numbers that he saw and others didn't? Victor's skepticism had been his downfall. The mistake was right in front of him the entire time, and yet it had taken Daniel to uncover it. As Daniel stood silently, watching the room process the revelation, a quiet satisfaction began to settle in. He hadn't done this for recognition or praise. For him, it was about doing what was right. His calm, unassuming nature hid a mind capable of seeing things others couldn't. As the weight of the situation hit Victor, Daniel remained composed, knowing that this moment, however pivotal, was just another step in a much larger journey. The question lingered in the air. How had Daniel seen the flaw so quickly, and what other hidden truths was he capable of uncovering? The mystery of his brilliance was far from over, and the answers, like the numbers he solved, were still waiting to be revealed. Victor's pride was wounded, and his instinct to protect it overwhelmed his ability to accept the truth. Despite Daniel's flawless calculation, something deep inside him refused to let go of his own certainty. The numbers, while convincing, didn't align with his decades of experience. Victor had spent his entire life in the business world, mastering the art of calculation and negotiation. His name was synonymous with success, and his reputation had taken years to build. For a young, unknown boy to challenge that success was something Victor could not easily digest, no matter how right Daniel appeared to be. The tension in the room was palpable. Even though the evidence was right in front of him, Victor could not bring himself to admit that Daniel had uncovered a mistake that would have cost him dearly. His grip on the situation tightened as he leaned forward, his eyes scanning the board members who were now waiting for his next move. There was an uneasy silence as the other executives looked at Victor, some uncertain whether to side with their boss or acknowledge the possibility that the boy had in fact been right all along. Victor cleared his throat, a sign that he was about to make a decision. Victor's voice broke the silence, his tone firm but carrying a hint of desperation. "I'll arrange for a third-party verification," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. His words hung in the air as if to suggest that the calculations could not be trusted unless confirmed by someone else. He couldn't fathom the idea that a teenager, someone with no formal training, could have seen what he, a seasoned millionaire, had missed. Victor felt the need to challenge the numbers again, to hold on to the belief that he had made no mistake. "Let's get another set of eyes on this," he insisted, hoping that someone else would validate his position. Daniel, unmoved by Victor's reaction, simply nodded. He had expected this. For someone like Victor, admitting a mistake in front of others was not just a matter of correcting numbers, it was a matter of personal pride. Daniel had no intention of arguing further. He knew the calculation was correct, and that was all that mattered. "The calculation is correct," Daniel said calmly, his voice unwavering. "The numbers speak for themselves. No third party is needed." His words were not a challenge, but a quiet statement of fact, as if he had already seen the outcome of the situation in his mind. It was clear to him that the evidence was irrefutable, and no amount of doubt could change that. Victor's skepticism only grew in the face of Daniel's unshakable certainty. How could a boy without formal business training possess the ability to see something that had eluded him? For a moment, Victor felt as though the very foundation of his career was slipping away. The idea that Daniel might be right and that his years of expertise could be undermined by a teenager was too much for Victor to bear. But it wasn't just about his pride, it was about what was at stake if he was wrong. If Daniel's calculation held, it would mean the deal he had worked so hard for could collapse, costing him not only money, but the trust of everyone in the room. Victor's reputation as a business mogul had been built on his ability to make decisions that others couldn't, on seeing things that no one else could. If Daniel was correct, it would mean that Victor's confidence had been misplaced. It wasn't just about the numbers, it was about his place in the business world. To admit he was wrong would shake the very foundation of his career. Victor had always been the one others turned to for answers, and now for the first time, he was questioning his own judgment. This wasn't just about saving money, it was about saving face, about proving to himself and to everyone else that he was still in control. As Victor awaited the third-party verification, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The minutes stretched on as the room filled with an uneasy tension. He could sense the eyes of the other executives on him, and he knew they were watching to see how he would handle this challenge to his authority. Some had already begun to side with Daniel, seeing the logic in the young boy's calculations, while others were still clinging to the belief that Victor could not possibly be wrong. Victor's mind raced as he tried to process what was at stake, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment could be a turning point in his career. Daniel, meanwhile, sat calmly in his chair, unfazed by the growing tension. He was used to being underestimated. He had spent his life in environments where people doubted him, judged him for his age, for his lack of formal education, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was the truth of the numbers in front of him. The calculation was correct. The mistake in Victor's approach had been clear from the start. Daniel wasn't interested in the accolades or the power that might come with being proven right. He simply wanted the truth to prevail, and he was confident that in the end, the truth would be all that mattered. The moment the third-party verification report was placed on the table, the room fell into an intense silence. Victor's eyes darted back and forth across the document, his hands trembling slightly as he read the words in front of him. The confirmation was undeniable. Daniel's calculation had been correct. The mistake in Victor's original figures had been glaring, and the implications were staggering. The boardroom, once filled with hushed whispers, was now stunned into stillness. Everyone in the room had been waiting for this moment, but no one had anticipated the outcome would be so decisive. Victor had been wrong, and the reality of that hit him harder than anything else. Victor's face flushed, the color draining from his cheeks as the weight of the situation settled in. His mind raced, replaying every moment of the meeting, the doubts he had brushed aside, the calculations he had trusted without question. How could he have missed something so critical? The mistake wasn't just minor, it was a colossal error that could have cost the company millions. His eyes flickered around the room, meeting the gazes of the executives who had once looked to him for answers. Now, There was no escaping the truth. He had been wrong, and Daniel had been right all along. The room reacted with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Some of the executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others simply stared at the young boy, who had managed to expose a flaw in the deal that had eluded even the most seasoned professionals. The tension that had hung in the air for so long seemed to dissipate, but it was replaced by a new, more complex atmosphere. It was as if the room had been shaken to its core. No one had expected a young teenager to outsmart the multimillionaire. But now, as the implications of the validation sank in, it was clear that Daniel had not only saved the deal, but had done so with a clarity that no one else had seen. Victor's pride, which had been his armor for so long, felt like it was crumbling. For years, he had relied on his expertise and his experience to navigate the complexities of the business world. His confidence had been his greatest asset. But now, in the face of Daniel's brilliance, it seemed like a fragile illusion. What was it that had made him doubt Daniel in the first place? Was it his age, his lack of formal education, or was it something deeper, an ingrained fear of being outshined by someone younger, someone who had no right in his eyes to challenge his authority? Victor had spent a lifetime building his empire, and yet here he was, standing on the precipice of one of his greatest failures. He had dismissed Daniel as an outsider, a kid who didn't belong in the high-stakes world of business. But what had Daniel shown him? That success wasn't just about experience or status. It was about being able to see the numbers, to trust one's instincts, and to understand the nuances that others overlooked. In that moment, Victor realized that his reliance on his reputation had clouded his judgment. He had been too focused on the superficial markers of success, age, credentials, experience, and had ignored the true value of sharp thinking and precision. As the shock began to settle, a reluctant respect started to form on Victor's face. It was subtle at first, but it was there, undeniable. He had been outdone, and while that stung, he couldn't deny the truth. Daniel had not only been right, but he had done something that Victor had failed to do. He had seen the mistake before it became a disaster. There was no escaping the reality of the situation, no way to ignore the fact that Daniel's quick thinking had saved the company from a potentially devastating loss. For Victor, this moment was a bitter pill to swallow, but one that would reshape how he saw the world moving forward. The rest of the room, while still in disbelief, now looked at Daniel with a newfound respect. What had once been seen as a fluke, a lucky guess, was now understood to be the work of someone who truly understood the numbers. Daniel's calm demeanor throughout the entire process was a stark contrast to the emotional whirlwind that had consumed the boardroom. While the others had been wrapped up in their own doubts and skepticism, Daniel had simply focused on what mattered, the numbers, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. As the validation confirmed what they had all feared, it became clear that Daniel was not just some kid off the street. He was a force to be reckoned with. Victor, standing at the center of the storm, felt a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. His world had been built on his ability to see the big picture, to spot opportunities where others couldn't. But here, in front of him, was a young mind that had done just that, except with a clarity and focus that he had missed. There was no denying it now. Daniel had proven that brilliance didn't come with a title or a fancy education. It came from understanding the world around you and being willing to trust your own instincts. As the tension in the room slowly began to ease, Victor was left with the unsettling realization that his own blind spots had cost him more than just money. It had cost him his place as the unquestioned authority in the room. As the executives began to discuss the next steps, still reeling from the magnitude of the situation, Victor remained silent for a moment. His mind was still racing, trying to make sense of everything. The report, the mistake, Daniel's quiet confidence, it all seemed too surreal. But there was one thing that was crystal clear now. He had to learn from this. The business world was changing, and Daniel had shown him a new way of seeing things, one that went beyond experience, beyond status. It was about understanding the numbers, the risks, and above all, being able to see what others missed. And for the first time in a long time, Victor realized that the game had changed. Victor sat back in his chair, his mind still reeling from the events that had just unfolded. His pride had been crushed, but it was also replaced with a quiet sense of relief. The validation had confirmed what Daniel had pointed out, and Victor now knew that had he not listened, the consequences would have been disastrous. There was no denying that Daniel had saved him and the company a fortune. His voice was hoarse as he finally spoke, looking directly at the young boy. "I was wrong, Daniel," Victor said, his words carrying more weight than he had intended. "Thank you for saving my fortune." The room was still, everyone waiting for Daniel's response. Yet to Victor's surprise, Daniel didn't seem interested in the gratitude. He didn't puff up with pride, nor did he smile at the recognition. Instead, he simply shrugged, his expression unchanged. "I just did the math," Daniel said quietly, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. There was no arrogance in his tone, no desire for praise. He was as humble as he had been from the beginning, unaffected by the accolades that had been offered. To Daniel, this wasn't about recognition or approval. It was about the numbers, nothing more. Victor, though grateful, found himself confused. He had expected some kind of reaction from Daniel, maybe even a sense of accomplishment or satisfaction. After all, the young boy had just saved him from a massive financial blunder. But there was nothing. Daniel wasn't seeking anything in return, not even a simple acknowledgement of his brilliance. It was as if saving millions of dollars was just another day for him. As the board members began to exchange quiet murmurs of approval, Victor watched Daniel closely, his mind grappling with the inexplicable humility the boy displayed. He was clearly a prodigy, yet he seemed completely indifferent to the fame or fortune that could follow. As Daniel prepared to leave the room, his quiet departure only added to the mystery surrounding him. He didn't linger for any further praise or congratulations. There was no self-satisfied smile or eager handshake. Instead, he simply stood up, gave a small, respectful nod to the people in the room, and began walking toward the door. His movements were calm, purposeful. As he reached the doorway, he turned briefly to one of the board members who had been watching him intently throughout the meeting. "This was just the beginning," he said, his words carrying a weight that was hard to place. There was something cryptic in his tone, as if he knew something the others didn't. The board member, caught off guard by Daniel's sudden comment, watched as the young boy left without further explanation. The room remained silent, the implication of Daniel's words hanging in the air. This was just the beginning. The statement was so casual, yet it felt loaded with meaning. The board member looked around, sensing that there was more to this young prodigy than anyone had initially understood. Why had Daniel made that remark? What did he mean by it? And why, after all he had done, was he so detached from the world of fame and accolades that everyone else seemed to crave? Victor, too, felt the lingering weight of Daniel's parting words. He had been caught in a whirlwind of doubt and pride, but now, as he watched Daniel leave, something else gnawed at him. The boy had saved him. Yes, but there was an aura of mystery about him that Victor couldn't shake. Was this just about the numbers? Was Daniel's intervention simply the result of his brilliant mind, or was there something deeper, something far more complex driving his actions? Why hadn't Daniel shown any desire for recognition? There was something unsettling about how little he seemed to care about the consequences of his actions. It was as if he had already moved on, leaving the boardroom behind, like it was an insignificant part of his journey. As the board members discussed the next steps, still processing everything that had happened, Victor sat in silence. He had learned a valuable lesson today, one that went beyond numbers and business. It was a lesson in humility, in understanding that brilliance could come from the most unexpected places. But Daniel had left him with more questions than answers. Who was he really? What was his true purpose, and why, despite saving a fortune, did he seem so intent on staying in the shadows? Victor couldn't stop thinking about those last words. This was just the beginning. What had Daniel meant by that? For Daniel, this moment was just another step in a larger journey. He wasn't looking for recognition, and he certainly wasn't seeking a reward for his actions. He had seen a mistake, recognized it, and corrected it. That was all. But his parting words hinted at something else, something far bigger than simply saving Victor's fortune. What Daniel truly wanted, what drove him, was still unknown to the others in the room. There was something beyond the numbers, beyond the recognition that fueled him. He wasn't interested in fame or wealth. There was a deeper purpose at play, one that none of them had yet to understand. His actions today were just the beginning, and the rest of his story had yet to unfold. Victor couldn't shake the events of the past few days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Daniel's calm face, his unwavering confidence, and his words, "I just did the math." What kind of person could save millions without a thought for the reward? Victor had built his empire by playing the game of business with relentless precision, but he'd never encountered someone like Daniel. Despite the boy's brilliance, Daniel had not sought fame or fortune. He had simply done what needed to be done, and then he'd walked away. It troubled Victor, and it nagged at him more than any business deal he'd ever faced. He needed answers. Victor decided to find Daniel. He had to understand what drove him, what motivated someone with such immense talent to walk away from it all. After some effort, he tracked Daniel down to a small, quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. The boy was sitting alone at a table, sipping coffee, seemingly unfazed by the whirlwind he had just caused in the business world. Victor approached with a sense of purpose. There was something about Daniel that intrigued him. Something beyond the math and the business deals. He needed to know what made him tick. "Daniel," Victor said, sitting down across from him. Daniel looked up, a slight smile crossing his face. "I've been thinking about what happened," Victor continued, his voice hesitant. "I want to offer you something that would benefit us both. A large sum of money, a position in my company. You've proven yourself beyond measure, and I think you could help us grow even further." He watched Daniel closely, expecting some form of excitement, some glimmer of interest. But Daniel's expression remained neutral, almost detached. Daniel paused for a moment, considering the offer. He set his cup down slowly, his gaze unwavering. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested," Daniel said, his voice calm and steady. There was no hesitation, no desire for what Victor was offering. Victor was taken aback. "Why not?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You have the potential to be part of something much bigger than you can imagine. Money, influence, power, they're all at your fingertips now." Daniel simply shook his head, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I'm not interested in those things," he said softly. Victor felt a mix of confusion and frustration building inside him. This was a boy who had just proven he could solve problems that had eluded the most experienced minds. He had the potential to shape the world, yet he was turning down everything Victor had worked his whole life for. "So, what is it that you want?" Victor asked, his voice quieter now. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. "I want to understand the game," he said simply. "Money isn't everything, but understanding the game, that's what matters." Victor furrowed his brow, unsure if he fully understood. "What do you mean, understanding the game?" Daniel's smile widened slightly, though it was not one of amusement. It was the smile of someone who knew something others didn't. "The world is a puzzle," Daniel said. "Business, politics, human behavior, it's all connected. Every decision is a move in a much bigger game. Some people play for wealth, others for power, but those are just distractions. The real game is about seeing how all the pieces fit together and using that knowledge to shape the world. That's what drives me." Victor was stunned. He had thought of business as a competition, a series of moves designed to maximize profit and control. But Daniel was talking about something much more abstract, something that went beyond wealth or fame. The boy didn't care about the rewards. He cared about understanding how everything worked, how the pieces fit together in a way that no one else could see. In that moment, Victor realized that Daniel wasn't just a brilliant mathematician, he was a strategist on a level that Victor could hardly comprehend. As they sat in silence, Victor felt the weight of Daniel's words settle over him. This conversation, this revelation, had changed everything. Daniel had saved his fortune, not for a reward, but because it was part of his grander plan. What drove Daniel wasn't personal gain, it was the game itself, the challenge of seeing patterns and making connections that others missed. Victor had spent his life climbing the corporate ladder, but Daniel had already transcended it. As Victor watched Daniel stand up to leave, the boy offered him one final thought that would linger in Victor's mind for years to come. You think you're playing the game, but the truth is, you're just one of the pieces. And with that, Daniel walked away, leaving Victor to grapple with the revelation that in the end, it wasn't the money or the power that mattered. It was the game itself.